to welcome everyone back to the Psychedelic Spotlight podcast. I'm David Flores, CEO of Global Track Solutions, and today I'm excited because we have a new guest here to the podcast. He is the CEO of Haven Life Sciences. You can find them on the Canadian Securities Exchange under the ticker symbol HAVN. Mr. Tim Moore. Tim, thank you so much for taking time to join me. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, David. It's great to be here. I'm glad to get in front of you and your audience this morning.
Yeah, we're very excited to have you on. So I guess to kick things off here, I'd like to open up the platform to you and give you an opportunity to share a little bit about Haven Life, especially for those out there who are maybe coming across the company for the first time, and give us an overview of what the company is involved in, and maybe share a little bit about some of the news that recently came out about the gearing up for the product launch here in early Q1 of 2021. So with that, I just want to throw it over to you.
Great, thanks very much. So Haven Life has two parallel strategies, one focused on restricted compounds, so Haven Labs, and then the other on natural health products or nutritional supplements. So let me talk first about labs, what we're up to there. It's very much evidence-based, science-based. What we saw as an opportunity in the marketplace is, as a gap, was to build an end-to-end supply chain of naturally derived compounds. There's several hundred psychedelic studies in the field right now around the world, and most of them are using synthetic psilocybin because naturally derived is difficult to get, and there really isn't a GMP supply of naturally derived, so they're using the synthetic. Challenge there is it's super expensive, $7,000 to $20,000 a gram, depending on who you are and when you're buying it, and a lot of the patients are rejecting the synthetic the same way that synthetic THC did not find much of an audience. So we looked at that, and rather than taking a 3 to 5 year runway of doing our own clinical research, we're building a supply chain to support the research that's out there. And we'll be growing mushrooms, extracting, and then doing various compounds. We'll do isolates as well as full spectrum. We see there's an opportunity for an entourage effect here, given the number of compounds that are in these mushrooms. Plus, we have right now a catalog of 24 genetics that we'll be able to work with. So we'll be able to custom make product for the researchers and then do the dosing and packaging. So send them prepackaged. So we expect to be in revenue on the lab side in the second half of 2021. So that's pretty exciting. We're in construction of our lab right now. We'll have the first psychedelic lab in Vancouver, and be able to, when we get our dealer's license, we'll be able to ship from there anywhere. We can export to anyone that's appropriately licensed in their jurisdiction. So we have a supply agreement with a study that's ongoing at the University of Wisconsin, and we're working on supply agreements with other researchers as well. So that's the lab side. The other side, which is Haven Retail, we're doing NHP, natural health products or nutritional supplements. And those products, although they're still serotonin active or have other effects on the body, they're not restricted the same way that psilocybin is. So in fact, they fall under the same rules as melatonin, chondroitin, glucosamine, or even ginger. So under either Health Canada or the FDA, you have to follow those guidelines. But we have our first 7 formulas have been approved. We're in manufacturing processing right now. We've got labels and bottles on order. We've scheduled line time. We've just announced today our first customer, which is Nestor's Markets in Vancouver. They're part of the Pattison Group, so that's a large, very sophisticated retail operator in Canada that operates a number of banners. And we're starting with Nestor's because that's the place where we believe consumers will be looking for this type of a product. And we'll be shipping to them in the first quarter of 2021. And we're in discussions with a number of other retailers and hope to have additional announcements there as well. So that gets us in revenue on both sides of our business before the end of 2021.
Very good stuff. And I want to talk a little bit too about your experience. I know you mentioned THC and synthetic THC, and I know one thing that stands out, to me about your background and your experience is the time you spent in the cannabis industry. And like myself, you were involved in that space in the very early days of it. You sort of saw the pitfalls, a lot of the mistakes that a lot of the early companies and ventures made as everyone sort of rushed to try and get their hands on anything they possibly could in the cannabis space. And with that, we're seeing something sort of similar, take place here in the psychedelic space, not identical by any stretch of the imagination, but somewhat similar. But I think that experience, having that experience under your belt is incredibly important and certainly very valuable. So share with me a little bit about how that experience is helping you sort of shape the path ahead here for Haven Life to make sure that it doesn't fall into the same sort of mistakes and traps that we saw in the cannabis space.
Yeah. So let's start with our team. We built our team to avoid one of the issues that we did see in cannabis, which was many companies were too slow in bringing business operators onto their team. So in the early days, a lot of these companies had stock promoters and growers, and they got a bunch of cash, and their best idea was, let's build a 2 million square foot greenhouse. But they didn't have anyone that really had taken a company through to revenue or done quarterly earnings reports or anything else. So as we built our team, we've got a great science team, but we counterbalanced that and complemented it with people like myself. For example, I've got 35 years in consumer packaged goods. So I've been through product launches and quarterly reports and all the rest of it. Our executive chairman, Vic Neufeld, he was at Jameson Labs, so he's been through that as well. Our chief science officer was at Jameson Labs. Another of our board members has been in nutraceuticals for a number of years. So we've got good operational experience to complement the science side. And I think another of the big differences is cannabis has a very large recreational play where psilocybin does not. We're certainly not talking about recreational use. We're talking about therapeutic use, medical use to support all of that research that's been ongoing over the decades, but the drug got caught up in the war on drugs and got stigmatized unfairly. And now, given the increased awareness around mental health and the rising issues of mental health, we're now seeing people seeking out psilocybin. So, policymakers, like Oregon and Washington, D.C., where they recently decriminalized it, is indicative of that. In Canada, we've seen a number of people be given personal exemptions to deal with end-of-life anxiety. And then now we've seen people with cancer that aren't in palliative care but are just ill being granted exemptions. So we think that we're going to see the snowballing of that with more groups. So parallel to what happened in cannabis 8 years ago, and what that leads to is a need for supply chain, because once the governments have issued permission for people to take it legally, then the policymakers need to ensure that there's a safe and reliable supply. The formulators need a safe and reliable supply, and so do the patients. So at Haven Life, we're going to be providing that safe and reliable supply of compounds to the industry.
Yeah, no, and I think, you guys are definitely, moving in the right direction with that, and having that foundation sort of, developed early on is so important. I want to also ask a question. I'd love to throw this question out to other leaders and CEOs of companies here in the psychedelic space. For a lot of us, our involvement in this space is quite personal in terms of what inspires us and what motivates us. I myself, I lost my father 2 years ago after a long battle with depression and addiction, saw his reliance, going from one pill to another, and just seeing how the healthcare system failed him. And that's really what motivated me. But what about yourself? What inspires you? What motivates you to be a part of this paradigm shift that we are experiencing here in terms of our approach to mental health conditions? What really is that fire, inside of you as to why you want to be involved in the psychedelic space?
Well, it is a personal connection, and it's very profound. I have 5 sons. My oldest son is 35. My youngest is 24. I've dealt with mental health issues with my sons over the decades. 2 of them have anxiety disorder. I had a suicidal 14-year-old, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone. We got through that. He's fine now. My youngest son has Asperger's, so he's dealt with a bunch of issues. My middle son got hit by a drunk driver 6 years ago and was disabled. He became an opioid addict. I spent a couple of years watching him die from opioids. He just kept, every day there was less and less of him there. Yeah. And ultimately it was cannabis that saved his life. And frankly, that was my motivation to get into the cannabis space when I saw what it did for him. And again, he's fine now. But when I look at the promise that psychedelics and psychoactive compounds offer to people with anxiety, depression, PTSD, anger management, substance abuse, all of these different things, and feel that I, through my involvement with Haven Life, can contribute to offering hope to these people for a solution in the future, I mean, that's my motivation, is how do we help people to get well? Because there's, 11% of the population that's currently dealing with mental health issues. That's going to grow. I think there's going to be an echo pandemic come out of COVID with half the survivors are now being diagnosed with anxiety or depression. People like Chris Cuomo that went on his show and talked about that. You're seeing millions of people that have been dealing with something that's bigger than any of the thing that the society's dealt with since probably the Second World War, where so many people have been immersed in a truly affective situation. So you lost your job, lost your business, lost a loved one, couldn't visit them in the hospital, had to cancel your wedding, have been trapped at home for 10 months. Whatever it's been, you can't have that many people go through that profound of a circumstance without there being some outcome. And then look at the people that were confronting this on the medical side. So healthcare workers that were, it was battlefield conditions for a long time, and it still is, and it could get worse. First responders dealing with it. Long-term care facility workers that saw a large percentage of their patients die in a very short period of time. So, there'll be an echo. And culturally, things have evolved so much in the last decade around mental health, where there used to be stigma around, saying that you were being treated for mental health. There's no stigma anymore. It's okay to not be okay. We've had, lots of public service announcements around it. We've had high-profile celebrities talk about it. And so you wouldn't stigmatize someone for getting treatment for cancer. Why would you stigmatize them for getting treatment for anxiety or depression? And that's different than it was a generation ago. So that's my connection to the industry, is a personal one of having dealt with mental health issues that I see continuing to grow in society. And what we're offering is hope.
Right. Those are some excellent points. I mean, I've said it before. I think if there was ever a time for psychedelics to make its way into mainstream society, the healing powers that it has to really, help people out there, now is the time, especially coming on the other side here of this pandemic, where you mentioned, so many people have been affected. So that hope is so important. And so that really is fantastic to hear. And maybe to pivot a little bit here, before I let you go, Tim, I want to talk a little bit, to those out there that are in the investment community. I know that we're starting to see the psychedelic space, become far more crowded. You have a lot more companies starting to pop up. It seems like every single month. So it's becoming increasingly challenging for companies to get their message out there and to stand out. So if there is anyone out there, in the investment community that maybe is taking a look here at Haven Life, what would be the message you'd like to get across to them as we are finally here closing the chapter on 2020, getting ready to move into 2021? Big picture, what can we expect to see from Haven Life going forward?
Well, again, let's go back to something you said earlier. What are some of the lessons that we bring from cannabis industry that we can look at? And they are things like not only having a good operational plan, but having a responsible capital table, having a responsible P&L and a responsible cash flow, so that you don't get in trouble, so that if you need money, you can get it when the timing is right. So you don't have to have a highly dilutive event and undermine shareholder value. So we've been extremely mindful of that. We just announced recently that we did a $10 million bought deal, which gives us cash that takes us well into 2022 before we would need to go to the markets again, unless we make a change in our business plan. So I would encourage investors to take a look at the burn rate and the cash on hand, so that companies have the appropriate runway, particularly companies that are looking at doing clinical studies, because that can be a 3 to 5 year runway before you get to revenue. And do they have the cash to get them there and get to revenue? That's why we've been so focused on having a plan to get to revenue and get to cash flow sooner, through both supply chain on the restricted compounds and the retail sale of natural health products. So we're pretty excited that what we built is sustainable, and that we will have an ongoing business with good strength. And when we get into revenue, then we'll be able to start providing some guidance to the market on what that looks like. Right now, we're not doing that because it's too early, but we're excited what our prospects are in the coming years to build a very significant company in this space.
Right. And having that plan is so important. And, it really seems like you guys are going about it methodically. And I think that is so important. It's having learned from the mistakes, again, that were made in the cannabis space. So, we can laugh about it now, but it was an interesting time. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
Well, Tim, unless there's anything else you wanted to add, I want to just thank you so much for taking the time to join me here today. I hope we can keep in touch, have you on again. Maybe, as we move into 2021, I'm sure there's going to be more news coming out here with Haven Life. But thank you so much again for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
The one thing I would like to say, David, is I'd like to thank my team. I mean, we started during a pandemic. We've raised $20 million. We've built an organization. We've started construction of a lab. We've put together a portfolio of natural health products, and we've done it all in a pandemic. And that's due to the really deep commitment of our team. And I just want to thank them for all of their work. And that's not only our employees, but it's also our support associates, our board, everyone that's been involved has just done terrific work. And I'm very proud of what we've accomplished in the last 10 months as a new company. So with that, I'll say thanks very much for your time. Look forward to chatting with you again.
Likewise, Tim. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Take care.